It's very nice to see so many people. And welcome to the last day of the Showbie week. We've had very interesting panel discussions and exciting keynote speakers the whole week. And today we have come to the favorite day of the week, the Nordic Day. My name is Jonny Gangsøy. I am Education Director in Showbie Nordics. And my first meeting with the Showbie was in 2014. And I'm very proud to be a part of the Showbie family. And today, Showbie has more than 3 million users in over 180 countries all over the world. So I think this is really exciting. Some practical information about this session. It will be about 30 minutes, and in the end, we will answer questions. And you can put in your questions in the Q&A field on the top of your screen. I am very excited to introduce the next keynote speaker, which is Vivi Vold from Greenland. I met her for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and we actually agreed on a 15-minute chat to find out if she wanted to attend in this and contribute in Showbie week. And that chat lasted for, I think, almost 2 hours. And I found Vivi very, very exciting, and her topics, I think it's very important. For me, it's actually the platform you need to have before the learning starts, before you start using digital technology. And her focus is Indigenous Knowledge, and that's very important to value the knowledge that the students have when they come to school, because as Michael Fullens says, if you look at the age group 15 to 19 years old, more than 60% of them find the school uninteresting and irrelevant. So it's very important to connect the students again in the education. So I really look forward to listen to Vivi. So I think I hand it over to you, Vivi.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity at the first. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Indigenous knowledge and student engagement in this context. First, I wanted to acknowledge the Indigenous people across the world, and I wanted to give an acknowledgement to the sacred knowledge they have passed down through generation, mostly orally and through spiritual teachings and ceremonies. And I wanted to acknowledge the land they live in, and where I live in, where Inuit live and lived in harsh environment and still managed to thrive with their own knowledge systems. And lastly, I wanted to acknowledge all the viewers and everyone listening, to acknowledge the land they live in and respect the ancestors who lived in that before them and passed down this knowledge and the huge knowledge they have in the land. It's very important to me to say this. So today I'm going to present. I have an overview about what I'm going to talk about and try to give a perspective of what I see as something important in this engaging students and engaging teaching, how to teach in a more meaningful way, if you can say it in that way. So I'm going to present a little bit about myself, who I am. It's important to connect with who I am, to connect with you and connect with the land I'm from and the language I'm speaking. Then I'm going to speak a little bit about knowledge in Western and Indigenous context. And after that, indigenous knowledge, insight research, and power and knowledge systems. All of these are important for me to explain and somehow present because of the context of understanding the framework we live in form of knowledge, in form of teaching, and how you engage student in overall. And then I will talk about spirituality and how Inua and Sila, it is connected, and the interconnectedness of knowledge is not only the intellectual knowledge, but the connection between the spiritual world and the land and inside ourselves. Decolonization of knowledge is something important to understand why we have to deal with it before we can actually engage students. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the actual engaging the students and engaging the whole locals. So Ginavunga, I'm going to present this in Greenlandic. That's why I have written this in English too. Ginavunga, Vivi Mik Atakapunga, Inuk Galasi Nunani, Ananavunga, Nayasunga Nukasunga, Nutalia Matomik Anosak Punga, Iliniaga Tong, Kultureleriso. At Tiavunga, Itugigaluan Nate Nathaniel Piniak Tosra. At some Nakasungalum, Natalia. Iliniaga Tuvunga, Elismatus of Fimate, Namasinikulunga, Katmagit. So where I'm from, Sumingano Punga, Ananaga, Ima Nasongminingano Pong. Adataga Papa Katu Usumingano Po Nogame Maninum Inungopunga Okati Pingatilud Okati Atosugit Asam Nisinaga Makoya Masupunga Okati Pingasut Usuin Nasutigata. So it's important for me to say this in our own language and start up with maybe show that to connect with me and you can connect with the knowledge and then where I'm from in the language. My daily language is A3. I speak 3 languages. So knowledge is many things. Knowledge is everywhere, and you can connect with knowledge and have some information that makes some knowledge in a Western or in a context and everywhere. So you can obtain knowledge, everything and in everywhere. But in knowledge of contemporary Western context, and when I say this, it means that we have in the last couple of 100 years science that is brought up with in the history brought up with a certain type of context and framework, and that inside that is the Western context. So knowledge in the Western context means the knowledge is typically written in words, especially in academic world. Knowledge is concept where your written words have a great meaning. That means also in students. You can't engage any teachings or education without written words in today's Western context, in this contemporary world. So this is a very generalized view of context of the contemporary Western knowledge. The knowledge is typically fractured. So you have taken one type of a problem and you have to maybe analyze it and then find some kind of a solution inside this fractured obstacle or something. And typically it's linear. You have a start and then you have an ending point. After that, inside this, there are typically some kind of a development based from primitive, how we live in caves and everything, you know the story about how it was and then we getting more and more modern and more civilized in some kind of this manner. And it is some kind of chronological certain order. And if you look back in the history of how you ordered these canons, like history canons, it's typically in chronological order. You have to learn this in order to learn this, and then you have to learn this in order to learn this. And then there is this idea of the universal objectiveness, that you have this some kind of a, when you sit in a position where you are a scientist, then you have some kind of automatically a better way of being objective, and the idea of that everything you have and Western science, that it is more in some kind of a general way of seeing things, and it's a natural way, or it's more some kind of objective universal thing. And that's the idea in the Western context, that when you are a scientist and you have you are assuming that you are a better way of being objective, of seeing things. So this is a more general way of seeing knowledge and using knowledge, and how you learned in different perspective in the Western way of having things. It's typically also in boxes, and the more structure it is, the better it is. Contra knowledge in indigenous context, where the complexity of knowledge with lies, it's much broader. It's more different to make it concrete as it is. As I showed you in Western context, where it is very much fractured, linear, and it's concrete. You can somehow see it in some way. Where it in indigenous context, it's everywhere. The knowledge, the knowledge is in the rocks, the animals, the land, the tides, emotions we have, and emotions between the relationship between the people and the humans, spirits, the relationship between the spirit world and ourselves, and the relationship between ourselves. Songs and speaking, each language and knowledge within. And this enormous complexity, it requires a lot of beyond the intellectual ability to comprehend this and to understand the connectedness it is, because it's holistic. Everything is connected. When you take something out, which you can't, it will connect, and it will somehow have a consequence with everything that connects with it. And that means if you are having some kind of teaching inside the society, then it will affect the rest of the local somehow. It is the theory of everything is connected, then it is spiral, it is never ending. It's some kind of a circle. And that's why many of the indigenous natives have this teaching of like circle talks and circle, and everything is connected in that way. It's when you talk about indigenous knowledge, I many times I talk about traditional knowledge, which inside the world tradition is very static in Western context, when it actually means it's always organic in indigenous context. And that means everything is always moving and evolving, and it's maybe it can be very difficult to understand the organic way of understanding this expanding, always evolving, of everything, of knowledge, of the connection of between everything. It also very spiritual. Knowledge is in everything and in everyone, and then it's very oral, and our teachings. It's not only knowledge, but it's our way of teach how to maintain some kind of a educate the children, but raising the children with values. It's everything is in very much in oral tradition of passing down knowledge, but also in understanding of for example, you teach the children with oral tradition for when they are not supposed to go to the beach because it's dangerous. Then you tell a storytelling by it's dangerous creatures in the sea. In that way, you have the same, you will get the learning of it's dangerous to be in the beach, but in their own perception of how they understand danger. So oral tradition is very much indeed in our knowledge and but in our teachings, and in my view is very important way of making children both relatable but also understandable in their way of fantasizing. Then it's not only inside in reason or rationalizing everything. It's dangerous because it's linear. Then you have some kind of rational explanation about it. But the amount of, the reason we do this is because the kids don't drown in the water. That's the actual, teaching. But the result is the same if you teach this in their manner and in their own understanding. So in teaching, in traditions, in songs, in storytelling, in ceremonies, and in different kind of tradition every native or indigenous have is very crucial to connect with the children, but also the everyone, youth and everyone, also to make the understanding of what it is, it makes sense to them. So in this way, that's a very different perception, if you can say that, contra the Western way. You have very much rationalized. It's not something that I wrote there, but it's very much rationalized, like inside the head, and not so much inside the rest of the connection we have between the spiritual world, because of it's so hard to rationalize the spirits as something we cannot see, something that we are not concrete with. So indigenous knowledge and research. To understand indigenous knowledge, it's very much crucial to mention research and what it is, the science and the origin. As I mentioned just a little bit earlier, throughout the history, research actually was to colonize every places that wasn't from the Western world, if you can say that. So it was a tool or some kind of they used to doing research about indigenous people, because it was something wild, it was something exotic, primitive and low value, just in the understanding, a lack of understanding of the indigenous knowledge systems and the complexity of how they use the land, and they use the knowledge inside their own land without exploiting everything in their own environment, but using it as something to be sustainable and actually be very, very much in front of everything and this is important to understand and decolonize the knowledge and the value of indigenous knowledge, because it will give the understanding for the student, and embrace the history, because then you will understand and have some kind of awareness of where the actual tools of research and science is from. It was actually to some kind of researching them, and it will give some kind of awareness to, okay, what can we do to use these tools, and so it becomes something we can use in our own local environment. And how can everyone from outside come and be aware of themselves as scientists and researchers or teachers, and what it is, because it is a favor of the Western worlds of knowledge, the structure and this framework. So how can we be aware of that, so we don't continue this framework and like break this pattern and do something more and more holistic about this knowledge. So in order to understand this framework, what I'm talking about right now is the power and the indigenous knowledge, the power of the Western knowledge, Western way of seeing things, Western epistemology, Western understanding, perception of life, and perception of how things should be, perceptions of the value of everything. So the Western way around the position of science creating institution in terms of what it is most reflective and gives the most real picture of how the world is connected. It has also throughout history been given a position of power precisely because of not given space for other knowledge system. And that's just what I said, because of this universal, assuming that Western way of seeing things is universal. And that way, when I say universal, it is understanding of it is the most objective way of seeing things, just because it is some kind of a rational way of analyzing things and analyzing knowledge. So this gives this universal way of and the position of imperialism and cultural countries. This has been used as a tool, gives very little or no at all, no space for indigenous knowledge or other knowledge systems besides the Western way of science relatable framework. And this power relationship, or the lack of it, if you can say that, the equity, the lack of equity and the lack of giving space for other knowledge systems, gives some very much or nothing at all space for the indigenous knowledge system, which is the way we do things right now in science and research, is that you take a little bit of something of indigenous knowledge, but you take the knowledge out of the indigenous knowledge system and use it, this little bit piece of information, and use it inside a science framework. And the whole context is missing, you know, the missing link is right there. And the lack of understanding is that the framework is very different. The systems are very different. And the way of learning is very different too. The abilities and the way we learn is very different inside both worlds. So this unequal power between them gives the, it's very hard to define or understand that when you just take something from one system and put it inside the science, it will not give the result of what you maybe wanted to be, as it like engaging the students or some kind of a teaching method. And inside this, when you take something out, and this context of understanding this framework is typically, it is the spirituality, because you cannot rationalize spirituality, something very hard to analyze. But maybe it's very common in anthropology and students studying this inside this, but overall in science and teaching, spirituality is not something you acknowledge in teaching methods. So, but it is one of the most crucial ways and methods to understand, to connect with the environment, to connect with yourself, and in between the people, because we are all connected. Again, it's that circle. It's like everything is connected in some kind. If you wanted to study and do some research about one topic, it will affect the rest of the circle. In Galatlisut, sila means weather. It's the outside weather, everything you see and everything you experience outside the weather and the nature. But it also means conscience, our consciousness, our mind, and they are very highly connected. Both are knowledges and needs to get connected in order to get the knowledge. That's Sila. Inua means everything has energy, if you can say it in that way. That means everything has some kind of a soul, some kind of a Inua in everything. So the rock, the tides, the land, the mountain, the people, the emotion, as I said before, everything. Inua. And the essence of it, the Inua means if you connect to yourself and connect, you will automatically connect to the outer world too. And in that way, when you are connected to that, you will connect to the knowledge inside everything. And in that way, you can and will have the understanding of everything and will be presented with that perception of knowledge. So this connection between learning and how to learn and how to connect with the knowledge is so crucial to understand in this context, because you will connect with the inside and outside world. Both world needs different approaches to expand, but it's the same when you connect with yourself. You will have very much easier connection with the outside world. So this quote is about from Tim Ingle. I really like. It's about our knowledge ability consists rather in the capacity to situate such information and understand its meaning within the context of a direct perceptual engagement with our environment. And we develop the capacity, this capacity in content by having these things shown to us. This, in my understanding and perception, is the connect. You need to connect with yourself, and we have to be able to be outside your own intellectual, or you have to be like more than the intellectual world in order to understand the context of this knowledge. And that, again, if you go back to the things I said earlier about frameworking, when you take something out of some framework from indigenous knowledge context systems and take that information, because that it will become information, not knowledge. It will become information inside the science framework. Then you lose this context of the understanding that was shown, that will be shown when you are connected to this system. In order to connect to this system, you have to connect with yourself, and then you will connect with the environment that you are in. So why is it important to understand the decolonization of knowledge and research? As I said before, the gap, if you can say it is a gap, because it is two different systems. There exist they coexist in the same world, but there is some kind of a gap and that gap is in my perception very spiritual way, and very lack of spirituality, lack of energy, and lack of wanting to understand in different ways than just Western way of rationalize everything. This is important because it gives an opportunity to some kind of a reflection and the impact the history has had among and on Indigenous peoples in general. It is something that has affected many Indigenous lands, Indigenous people, and this will actually give an opportunity to understand the history and use this as a tool to go and make some kind of a coexistence between the worlds and understanding. And this will engage the locals and their students in their own terms and understanding. So this will also give the understanding of everything I have just talked about, the creation of research and the actual meaning of this, and this will understand that this will give an understanding of that which dominant framework it is that research and teachings are in, and this will give an understanding the lowering of value of Indigenous knowledge, rather just to when you understand this will give some kind of tools to come and work between those systems. So organization it doesn't mean and has not meant to total rejection of all theory or research or Western knowledge at all, because everything is coexists. Rather, it is about centering our concerns and worldviews, and then coming to know and understanding theory and research from our own perspective, from our own purposes. This was Linda Tuhiwai-Smith from Decolonizing Methodologies, where she actually says what I just said, that we need to understand research, theory, and teaching from our own framework, from our own Indigenous knowledge systems, in order to engage the students. And that's what I'm going to tell very much about now. Lastly, understanding the principles of these, understanding the history of research, understanding of the colonization and imperialists, where this come from, will actually give some kind of a ways of understanding how to come out of this, how to engage students, because of the structure and knowledge and ways of learning are different in Indigenous structures. And the learning and engaging of students will require teachers and other educational people to use their other abilities and skills and intellectual skills as Western structures requires. It will require the same in Indigenous structures, Indigenous people structure systems. And that is something that I didn't mention a lot, is abilities and skills that Indigenous peoples have, the skills to connect to themselves, the skills to understand and perceive the world other than just themselves, but connect with the environment. That's also a skill. That's abilities that in my context, in my understanding, that many teachers from Western needs to understand and some kind of a teach themselves or teach everyone. This actually means teachers and educators need to connect with themselves and their environment, and this means using storytelling, using traditional oral and traditional ceremonies in order to use the locals more, because they are the real experts. They know the land, they know the principles and everything. So the elders, women, hunters, gatherers, everyone. you actually have to engage the whole community. Again, the interconnectedness with everything. And in order to make it happen, everyone needs to be included, and the rest of the community in some sense needs to be included as well. This inclusion will give ownership of everything, teaching, knowledge, ownership of the place and the land, and the children, and everyone. And this will give some kind of a motivation to do and be more because of the inclusion, a feeling of being included in that term. So overall, everything, to sum it up, then the most important is that you have to give some kind of an insight of everything, where it comes from and why it is important to decolonize knowledge, and teaching, maybe teaching methods to engage the students, and in that way it will engage students much more, in my view. That's what I actually had to say. I don't know how long it has been.
It's been perfect, Vivi. So thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. So if anyone have questions they want to ask, you can put it in the chat, and then Vivi will answer them. I think it's, as you know, Vivi, it's very interesting when you talk about indigenous learning and knowledge, because I think when I look to Norway and the Nordic countries, and and the new curriculums that are coming, they are close. The approach is closer to indigenous learning and knowledge. I think less structured, more holistic and organic and never-ending knowledge, as you mentioned. So I actually have maybe two questions in one. What do you think will be the main challenges to make the educational systems value indigenous knowledge more? What will be the obstacles, you think? And how can we use digital technology to help us getting closer to indigenous learning and knowledge? What do you think, Vivi?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think one of the main obstacles there is to understand the indigenous knowledge and use this in teachings is, it is a very long history of researching in a Western context, in Western ways. And this means you have to include more of everything that is besides just writings. So that comes digital in, where I can see very much potential of teachings if with the digital. Again, when you talk about traditional indigenous knowledge, that doesn't mean you have to go back in like 100 years ago. It means that you use this knowledge that is and there are here now in order to be right here where we are. So use the technology more in teaching method, because it open up some it expands some kind of a way of doing things just beside writing and reading, and maybe it will give some kind of a chance to use this as tool to actually do something more creative and use the skills and abilities that indigenous have. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And we have got a question here. What do you think Western schools can learn from indigenous way of learning?
Many things. I think every I don't think we need to we need to understand there's different kind of systems, but we need to understand that they can coexist, and they coexist rather if you like it or not. We have both indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge, but how can you like understand the both? It's not only the other way around, not only this or that, but how can you, I think the Western world, or the world that you call or we call the Western world, is from the European or the modern world today, if you can call it that, needs to connect very much more with themselves. Again, when we connect with ourselves, we connect with everyone inside and between everyone. So it is important to, I think we lack that in this world. I think the Western world too deeply needs to connect, and that's why we see all of this consequences of depression and anxiety and everything like that. It's, in my view, is a result of lacking the connection between both themselves and then the world, and the spiritual world. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, thank you again. I think we have time for one more question. I'm learning about Greenlandic myths and recommendations what to read that is written by an Inuk. Do you have any recommendations?
That's a good I don't actually know. That's not my strong side because of I read mostly English theory about indigenous knowledge. But I think if it's academic or something, Robert Peterson is a good, he was our first rector in University of Greenland. He wrote a quite a bit good text.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think we need to wrap it up. And a former speaker today from Sweden, he said it was very important to know me before you teach me. That was a mantra in his school. And I think you have said some of the same things in your presentation.
Yes.
And I think it's all about connecting the students to the school, to the education systems, so they actually feel valued in the systems. And yes, thank you very much, Vivi, for a very interesting and exciting presentation.
And thank you.
Hopefully we meet again. So yes, and
thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and goodbye to everyone.